Hello, everybody. This is Tony Hager, and we are joined by Lance Palmer in the Nike hot seat. Myself, Brad Johnson, are here to catch up with you a little bit. Lance, how you doing today?
Doing well, man. Just finished my last sparring for this camp and feeling good, feeling ready to go to Canada and defend my belt.
Tell everybody what you've been up to since you left Columbus.
Since I left Columbus, I spent one season of wrestling at Virginia Tech. It was 2010, 2011 season. I had a great time coaching at Virginia Tech, but during that time there, I realized that I wasn't done competing yet, and I still had a lot in the tank left, and I wanted to use my wrestling background to start competing in mixed martial arts. And I had met with Uriah Faber a few times in that time period after I finished wrestling at the national tournament in 2010, and he told me that I was more than welcome to come out and train and join the team at Team Alpha Male in Sacramento. And literally right after Philadelphia NCAA tournament in 2011, April 1st, I packed all my stuff into a storage unit in Blacksburg, Virginia, that Coach Dresser actually owned, or his friend owned, and I moved out to California, and I've been here ever since. It's been a great 4 years. It's been a great experience, a lot of learning. It's been awesome to learn something from scratch again, and wrestling. I was still learning wrestling and still learning how to get better every day, but learning a completely new sport, actually a few new sports, is it's something that keeps your brain fresh and keeps you learning. So it's been an awesome experience out here, and I've had great success so far. I've had 3 professional titles, and I hold one with World Series of Fighting right now as a featherweight. And I have a professional record of 9-1, and I'm going for my 10th pro win next week.
Since leaving Columbus, a wrestling life, how you go throughout your day is probably a little different than a fighter's day. What is an average day in the life of Lance Palmer?
Right now,
Yeah, right now as you're getting ready to fight.
as this last week, an average day is get up in the morning, make some oatmeal, make some coffee, um, have drink some water, take my vitamins, and kind of get my bag ready for practice if it's not done the night before. Go to practice in the morning. We have one morning practice each day, Monday through Friday, whether it's pro MMA practice or wrestling. So Tuesdays and Thursdays I run the wrestling practices in the morning, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings are pro MMA practices, and go to that. Done with those by like 11 a.m. and then eat lunch, relax, and depending on what day it is, I have different practices in the afternoon, but I have 2 to 3 practices each day depending on how I feel. And we have a lot of different schedules going on with different guys fighting at different times. So your afternoon practices are kind of based off your schedule, whether it's strength and conditioning 2 or 3 times a week, or if you're going to jiu-jitsu practice 2 times a week in the evenings, or if you're just getting individual mitt work with your boxing coach or your kickboxing coach. So there's a lot of different things that we could be doing inside and outside of our fight camp. So the cool thing about Team Alpha Male is it's a team, but just like anything else, you have to put the work in on your own.
So you said you were still learning a lot about wrestling when you started in MMA. How long did it take you to get comfortable with striking? The first couple times you got hit, was that a different experience for you? Or how many did you have to take before it was like, this is something I can handle?
I think a lot of guys explain it the same way is you never want to get hit. Obviously, I mean, there's some guys who like a brawl and some guys who just like to stand and bang. And being a wrestler, I've always been tough. If somebody clubs me on the back of the head, I'm going to do the same thing back to them and snap them down and try and score the takedown. Same thing in a fight. If you get punched in the face, if you get caught with something, it's a little different because you can get knocked out, but the same scenario goes. you want to get in there and get that one back and get after it. And the goal is to move your head and not get hit. And that, as I kind of started to learn a little bit more about it, I learned that, you know, I'm able to take a punch and I'm able to block a lot of things, and it doesn't really hurt me to be able to stay in there and defend punches instead of always moving out of the way and trying to get out of the way of punches, but blocking and defending them is something that I'm good at. And I mean, it took me a long time to get my style of striking down. But it also, I realized right away that, you know, I'm not afraid of punches. And so that was something that makes it more comforting, you know, when you go into a striking practice or a sparring practice, that I'm not afraid to get hit, but obviously nobody wants to get hit. And the goal is to not get hit and hit the other guy, or hit the other guy more times than you get hit. So I mean, the game has changed so much. It's not a primitive game anymore. It's like a chess match where it's a game of inches. And, you know, if you move your head 2 inches out of the way instead of, you know, dipping all the way out and get caught with a kick, and there's little things that you need to do. And that's how I look at it. Just like as wrestling isn't just a brawl. It's a game of hand control, hand fighting, moving your feet, setting up your shots. The same exact thing with boxing and striking. And that's kind of how it was easy for me to compare the two and kind of advance my skill in boxing and kickboxing.
How is wrestling and MMA different than what you grew up doing? Have you had to adjust to wrestling inside of a cage rather than on a mat?
Yeah, it's definitely different. You don't wear shoes. My stance, since I'm a lefty, I would have my left foot forward in wrestling, but I'm a lefty striker, so I have my right foot forward in MMA. So I had to set up my shots a little differently, depending on who you're fighting against. It depends what leg they have forward also, and it's similar. It's similar to wrestling in a way where you have to set up your takedowns, but instead of setting them up by grabbing and pulling them, it's not always like that unless you're against the cage or in a clinch position or over under position. You're setting up your takedowns off of your punches and level changes. So there's a little more of a distance gap that you have to close, and that's why you use your punches to get in, or your fakes or your level changes, and that's the biggest difference. But as far as the actual shot goes, the only difference I really made is that I don't really hit my knees as much. It's more of a blast shot, or you shoot in and then go to your dump right away if they defend it, or you lift right away. The level is a little higher as far as how low or high you need to be to the ground. I think most of the people in MMA have a little taller stance, obviously, to be able to strike. So I think that's where the higher takedowns come in instead of hitting your knee on every takedown.
With wrestling, I'm sure you had an inspiration growing up, developing your style. This is a whole new a world that you said. Who has been your biggest inspiration as a fighter?
I think I just look to my teammates in the gym. As you know, everybody has something different that they bring to the table that they're really good at. TJ Dillashaw, you know, he wrestled at Cal State Fullerton, and he moved on to be in the finals of the Ultimate Fighter, and now he's the UFC bantamweight world champion, and he's beat a guy who hadn't lost in 9 years, and proved everybody wrong, and he turned into a complete striker and a complete fighter just from wrestling. And Chad Mendez, who's one of the baddest dudes on the planet at featherweight in the UFC, and almost dethroned Jose Aldo in his last fight, who's a powerhouse and who's been the UFC and WEC champ at featherweight for years. And Uriah Faber, who's kind of a pioneer of the lighter weights in the sport of MMA, who wrestled at UC Davis. So I look at the guys on my team and I'm like, these guys are the best guys in the sport, and our team has won the best team in MMA in the world the past 2 years in a row, and they're the main reason for that, and they're a lot of the reason why I'm making the gains and the progress that I'm making every day in the gym. And when Uriah's not training for a fight, and when he's in town, he's in the gym, and like today, he was pushing me through my sparring, coaching me through my sparring rounds of my last week here, and every detail that I've learned in MMA come from these guys at Team Alpha Male. And so I don't have to look any farther than looking up to those guys. They've paved the way for me, even if they're only a couple of years older than me. And you know, I have to tip my hat off to those guys for helping me every step of the way and with the little things, because they were wrestlers at one time too, with you know, no striking, and now all those guys are heavy hitters and they're able to strike and take guys down and submit guys and knock guys out. So coming from just a wrestling background, those are the only guys I need to, you know, look up to. I mean, there's other guys in the sport like Daniel Cormier and Chris Weidman, who are also UFC champions now, that came from strictly wrestling. So wrestling is definitely the best base to have, but it's how you use it and how you set it up with your strikes and make people afraid of your ground game to where you can set up your strikes and they're aware of it. You know, it's awesome to see wrestling growing just by the amount of guys who are succeeding in mixed martial arts.
Well, Alpha Male, like you mentioned, I mean, some of these names, they're the top fighters in the world, and they're on your team. Is it possible that you guys will eventually have to fight one another?
It's definitely a possibility. You know, if I go to the UFC after these next 4 fights with World Series, I just, you know, right now I'm just focused on each fight in front of me, but I know it's definitely a possibility. Chad Mendez is he's the top dog at 145. And I know when I do go to the UFC, I'm going to be placed in a top 10 fight right away. And I'll be, you know, one step closer each fight to fighting him. But I look forward to Chad winning this belt and, you know, in the next year. And then we'll go from there. And there's plenty of other guys in that top 10 of the UFC before I fight Chad. But, you know, it's always something that you're going to have to deal with eventually when I sign the UFC contract, whenever that may be.
You mentioned that you guys have a ton of wrestlers in your camp. If we had a wrestling tournament at Alpha Male right now, just folk style, who would win?
I think it would be between me and Chad. Me and Chad have the best goes in the room with each other, as far as just our backgrounds in wrestling also. And, you know, we're not in the room together all the time if we're training for somebody who's not that style or whatever. But I think Chad and I would be in the finals of it. And, you know, it could go either way depending on who's better on that day.
Who's the best dressed guy on Team Alpha Male?
Self-proclaimed best dressed guy would be Joseph Benavidez. He's got a knack for style. And he's kind of, we always say he's an old man trapped in a 30-year-old's body. Because you know, he likes to wear Birkenstocks and corduroy jackets, and he's one of those guys who he has the style of, you know, the 80s, but once it comes back around, he'll already be in style again. So I think Joseph Benavidez would be a self-proclaimed best style guy. Biggest sneakerhead, even though I'm trying to catch up, is Danny Castillo. He's he's got every pair of Jordans you could imagine, and so I think those two guys probably have, you know, the best style that I try and, you know, I try and take a little style from each of those guys.
You mentioned when you sign your deal with the UFC, and Sherdog posted an article today that said you would lose around $8,000 per fight in the UFC. Is the Reebok deal the main reason you decided to stay with World Series of Fighting?
Not at all. That $8,000 is just on sponsors. The deal with the UFC for Reebok is your first 1 through 5 fights with the UFC, you make $2,500 on sponsorship from Reebok. So on this fight coming up next week, I plan on making close to 10 with, you know, different sponsors that I have and people, you know, from back home who have sponsored me from day one. And so that doesn't even count the fight purse. You know, your entry level fight purse is supposed to go up for the UFC, but World Series of Fighting is taking care of me, and they're great for me, and they have great competition for me right now. And these are great fights for me to build my resume and get more comfortable in the cage each fight and show more skills each fight. So that's the, they didn't mention that. They didn't mention that that's just on sponsors. 8,000 is only the amount I'll lose on sponsorship. I'll lose a lot more on the fight purse also, because the deal that I have with World Series right now is something that I wouldn't be able to get with the UFC.
So you this is something that you would want as a UFC. I mean, I think it kind of came off as it would be almost a bad deal, but you're kind of saying that it would be the opposite. I mean, guys want to be in the UFC, correct?
Yeah, the UFC is where everyone wants to be. It's like everybody wants to say, I'm a UFC fighter. And people that don't understand MMA, they're like, oh, you fight UFC? Like, it gets annoying sometimes. And Faber always told me, he's like, man, when we were in the WEC, we were the top dogs for the lighter weights, but nobody knew what the WEC was. And they would, they're like, oh, you fight UFC. And he would have to explain, the WEC is MMA. It's like, some people don't understand. It's like calling, like, oh, you play NFL. It's like, no, I play football in the NFL, and I fight in World Series of Fighting, but the UFC is another organization. And people are like, oh, okay. But if you're in the UFC, you don't have to explain that. You can just say, oh, yeah, I'm a UFC fighter. So that's like, the UFC is they're the biggest powerhouse for MMA right now, because they have they've been around for a long time. They're the pioneers of MMA since Pride and Strikeforce and all that. They're the big dog in town, and they're going to be around for a long time. So that's where everyone wants to be. But I think with this Reebok deal and with a lot of different things going on, I think a lot of fighters are going to start trying to pull their weight a little bit more, because they know the kind of money the UFC is making, and they know that fighting isn't going to be forever. Your career only lasts so long. You have to make as much money as you can in the short time you're there, and that's why a lot of guys are frustrated with the amount of money they make in the UFC. And it's hard to negotiate. That's why it's important to have a good manager who can help you negotiate a new contract. And if it doesn't work out, there's other organizations to go to.
With the UFC being all over the place on multiple channels, and not if you're not an elite wrestler going for an Olympic title, you're thinking MMA. What advice do you have for wrestlers looking to transition into MMA?
I think just to get with a team that you fit in the best with, and have great people around you, positive thinking people, and people who think like you. Most top wrestlers, I mean, even if you're not a top wrestler, but for example, Ed Ruth just announced that he's going to start fighting, and he signed a deal with Bellator. And that he's the top wrestler in the world, believe, whatever people want to believe, he's a top dog. Maybe he didn't, do well at the, whatever, but Ed Ruth is a top wrestler. If you watch that guy's matches, he's a freak. And that guy, for him to want to go into MMA, it's awesome, because it just shows that, USA Wrestling needs to step their game up and start paying these guys to wrestle and make wrestling more of an attractive sport. I love wrestling. It's always going to be my sport, but the main reason that I didn't want to stay in the sport and try and make that goal of making it to the Olympics or win an Olympic title is mainly because, I was struggling. Tommy Rollins was one of my coaches for a couple of years at Ohio State, and I watched him compete and fight his butt off every day in the room, and ended up losing to Mako in the finals of the Olympic trials, and barely getting by. He had kids and a wife, and he's just, trying to raise money every week just so he can, support his dream of making it to the Olympics. And that it shouldn't be like that. If you want these guys to keep wrestling and stay course to have a great Olympic team and win a team title at the Worlds or the Olympics, you gotta start supporting these guys the way that they support wrestling.
Now, we did an event called Agon 5, the Iowa Against the World, and there was some big money thrown out there, anywhere from 10 to 20,000 for wrestlers. I don't know the exact dollar amount of who got what, but is that the type of money that needs to be in the sport of wrestling for these wrestlers to get paid around that mark, or does it need to be north of 25,000 per match?
No, I think that's great. I think it's great that they're paying guys 10,000 to wrestle a big match in front of a big crowd in Iowa. Obviously, Iowa's that's where, everybody wanted to go back in the day, and there's still guys that always, Iowa wrestling is the style that people want to mimic. But to have big matches like that, like the beat the street stuff and stuff like that, that's huge for wrestling. To have wrestling in Times Square or somewhere where there's a big following, or if it's on TV because it was on NBC Sports Network, stuff like that is going to help build the sport. I'm just talking in general as far as like if you win the U.S. Open, you should get more than 3,000 or 5,000. I don't know what those guys get paid. I just know it's not a lot. I have, Humphrey's one of my close friends, and Tervel, Delagnev, all those guys. I mean, those guys should be making good money to go out there and wrestle for their country.
I 100% agree. I mean, you're exactly spot on. If we want to keep these guys in wrestling, it's going to be more and more attractive to not go the Olympic route and try to make these big fights. Just because there's so many wrestlers that have won titles. I mean, that if you see one guy do it, you got to say to yourself as a wrestler, why can't I do that? So, with wrestling, was there any regrets in your career in that sport? Now that you've been able to get out of it and you've completely switched gears, do you have any regrets?
In wrestling, I've trained for a lot of years, and I put in the hard work and dedication, and there were times where I wondered if what I was doing was enough, and I don't have any regrets. I mean, I never won a national title in college. I was a 4-time All-American. I was a finalist as a senior. I was a Big Ten champion my senior year, and I look to guys like Logan Stieber and Kyle Dake who've won 4 national titles and at different weight classes, and it's unbelievable. But I also know that you go into it where March it's a crazy month. Your entire career is based off of one weekend in St. Louis or Nebraska or wherever the tournament is, and that's your whole career. It's based off of that 3-day tournament, those 5 or 6 matches, or 7 or 8 if you lose, depending what happened. And I have no regrets. I put in all the work I could put in. I guess as you could say, there's only so much training you could put in, and then you always have to have a little bit of luck on your side to be able to get that stuff done. And I was lucky to have a dominant 4 years in high school and win 4 state titles and be a senior national champ my senior year of high school and get recruited on a full ride to Ohio State. I mean, I had a great wrestling career. Didn't get it done in college as far as winning a national title, and that was my main goal. I came close so many times, and there was a couple matches at the national tournament that, I could say that I got screwed, but I don't want to live that way and always have that regret of, saying I didn't do enough, because those matches were so close that it really comes down to luck. You can't blame the referee. You just, matches are that close all the time, and that's the way it goes. But I have no regrets about my career. I put in so much hard work, and everybody asked me, do you think you would have redshirted if you would have, going into it? And I never would have changed anything. I'm happy with the way my career went and in college, and I had a great career at Ohio State. I built a ton of great relationships with Joe Haskett, Lou Roselli, Tom Ryan as my coaches. I would do it all over. I would do the same thing over and over again, if that's what I had to do.
What would you say your greatest moment as a wrestler was at Ohio State, or at any time?
Greatest moment. I had a lot of awesome moments at Ohio State wrestling, whether it was dual meet matches. I guess people would say my biggest win was my win over Brent Metcalf in the Big Ten Finals in 2010, just because that's a guy who, nobody's supposed to beat that guy. The year before in the finals, he lost to Darian Caldwell in a crazy match, and Caldwell came out firing on all cylinders and scored a lot of points early and kind of got Metcalf frustrated, and he couldn't come back from that. And, you know, we had a great match. We had two great matches that year that were really close before that, or one match before that, and then the match after that in the national finals, Brent Metcalf and I. And it was awesome to have that rivalry with somebody where, even though maybe for him it wasn't a rivalry, I only beat him one time out of the 6 times we wrestled in college. But for me, it was always that measuring stick that I needed to get over that hump. I got to beat this guy. I had the confidence to beat him. It was just going out and getting it done when it mattered most. And I didn't get it done in the national finals, but to win that match at the Big Tens in front of the whole Big Ten crowd, because obviously everybody roots against Iowa because they're always the powerhouse and everybody wants to see an Iowa guy lose. And to see the Ohio State crowd going nuts, it was awesome. That was probably my most victory, because I had a lot of close matches with him at the national tournament in years past. My sophomore year, I lost by 1 point. I think it was 3-2, and there were a couple controversial things happening in the match, and on a double leg, and he was pulling my singlet as I was getting the takedown, but his hand hit the mat for a split second. But the reaction back then, that wasn't two. So there's a lot of crazy things that have happened at the national tournament, you know, for me. But that Big Ten tournament, to go out and my senior year and finally, you know, take a title was that was probably my biggest match. And a lot of people still to this day, the match for having the Big Ten finals was one of my favorites ever, just because of the way it happened and the way it shook out in the last minute.
Well, that was one of your greatest moments as a wrestler, but Ohio State wrestling just won a national title, Lance, and what was it like watching your team finally win that national title?
It was, man, it was awesome for them to be able to go out and do that. It's something that we've worked for. As Tom Ryan said, you know, when I first came in, was his first year there also, and he said, you know, we're the pillars to this program, and we're just building a monument. And we were the pillars. Me, Mike Basillo, Jason Johnstone, J.D. Bergman, Jay Jaggers, you know, a few other guys. We were the cornerstones to building a team that was able to go out and do that. And we fell short a couple years. I mean, we placed second 2 years in a row. We took third, and we took 10th. And the 4 years that I was there, and the 1 year we took second, we were literally, I think it was like 2.5 points away or something like that. And if we would have had one person win their match to be an All-American, we would have taken first. And sometimes it just doesn't work your way and doesn't go your way as planned. But it wasn't meant to be at that time. And for them to go out this year and do a great thing that they did by having, you know, two freshmen in the finals, having a true freshman in the finals in Kyle Spear, having you know, Thomas win a national title after beating a two-time returning champ Delgado at the Big Tens in the semifinals, and just having a great end of his season, and for Logan Stieber to end his career with a national title as a team, a Big Ten title as a team, and obviously having his fourth national title also. It's the credentials for that were awesome, and I think it's only going to go up from here. You know, we send off a 4-time national champion and Logan Stieber, but that team's going to be lethal for the next few years at least.
We're talking with Lance Palmer, Ohio State wrestler, up-and-coming MMA star, fighting for Alpha Male. And Lance, you've got a big fight that you're getting ready to go pick some shirts up, traveling to Canada, and we want to talk about, you know, there's people that you have rivalries. You talked about Brent Metcalf, and there's some grudges that you maybe have. In MMA, is there anybody that you personally would want to fight?
Honestly, I don't have any grudges with anyone in MMA. There's no, I mean, I think there's guys in the UFC that I would like to fight just to test my skill against and test myself with those top 10 guys in the UFC. But I mean, I don't have rivals with anyone. I want to go out there and perform my best, and obviously I want to go put on a show and beat everybody that I fight. But I've never had an opponent that I disliked, or, you know, some of the guys have talked crap to me before the fight a little bit, but I think it was just to build their own confidence, and guys that don't think they're confident enough to win on their own. They have to talk a little bit to build their own confidence. And I don't really, I don't get into that stuff too much. I just go out there and do my best to put on a great performance. So I can't say I have a grudge with anybody in MMA right now, or there's anybody that I'd like to call out.
What would you like to say to the guy that's coming for your belt? I mean, you're fighting next Friday night. What would you like to say to him?
I mean, I don't really have anything to say to him. All the work is done in the gym, and all the speaking is going to be done in the cage when we go in there and start the fight. But he is coming for my belt, but I trained like I don't have the belt. I train like I'm the person that's going for the belt. In every fight, that's how it is. I'm not training to protect the belt. I'm training to go out and win the belt each fight, and that's the mentality that I have to have. I feel like when you start to go out and train to protect the belt, that's when you're going to lose, because you're training not to lose instead of training to go out and dominate and get a win.
Where can wrestling fans and MMA fans watch this fight next Friday?
Next Friday, June 5th, on NBC Sports Network. It's channel 220 for DirecTV. And I think it's also on WSOF.com as a live feed. And the main card starts at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm excited to go out there and put on another great performance like I did my last fight, and hopefully show more improvements.
Sponsors have played a big part in helping you train for this fight and the past fights. Who are some sponsors that have played a major part in your career so far?
Well, for this fight, I'd like to thank Torque. I'd like to thank Blue Horizon Stem Cells. They were with me for my last fight also. And a lot of these people are hometown people from Cleveland, Ohio, and just Ohio people. Defense Soap. The owner of Defense Soap was actually my middle school West Shore Wrestling Club coach, and his son wrestled in high school with my younger brother. So always great to have his support. PinnedMovie.com. They made a documentary on myself and my team my senior year of high school at St. Edward High School, and it was awesome, and it turned out great. So it's awesome to have their support also in the cage. And then Barley House Cleveland, that's where my watch party is for my fight on Friday. And they have a private room for the watch party. It's $40 off eat and drink, 8 to midnight. And it's limited to like 80 people, but that's going to be awesome. It's going to have all my fans there and all my hometown people there cheering me on who can't make it out to Canada. And, peoplefinders.com, they're local to Sacramento. And they look for people, background, you name it. Peoplefinders.com. They've supported me, and Team Alpha Male. Obviously, they're not a sponsor, but that's my home. That's my team.
Again, we've been here with Lance Palmer. I'm Tony Hager. Brad Johnson on behalf of Takedown Wrestling. We wish you safe travels up to Canada and best of luck defending your belt, Lance.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me on again.
You've been listening to Takedown Wrestling at takedownwrestle.com.